All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. You know, we love getting your research requests, and this one is juicy. We're diving deep into whether the U.S. might actually be losing its grip as a global superpower.
You guys send over some fascinating research.
Definitely complex stuff, lots to cover.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking everything from financial instability to,
Crazy new technologies popping up.
oh, absolutely. And let's not forget the political landscape. Woof.
Definitely some internal struggles there. So, big question is, are we seeing the beginning of the end for American dominance, or is this just a temporary thing, a phase?
A phase. I don't know about that. From what I'm seeing in these sources, it really feels like multiple pressures are all kind of hitting at the same time.
Like a perfect storm.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just one thing, right? It's this crazy mix of factors all coming together.
Makes sense. I mean, one thing that really jumped out at me from the research was that U.S. national debt number. Did you see that? $33 trillion.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. I can barely even wrap my head around a number that big.
Right. It's astronomical.
Yeah.
So, I mean, does that basically mean the U.S. is in serious financial trouble?
Well, the research seems to think that kind of debt really limits what the U.S. can do moving forward. Things like investing in infrastructure, education, research.
All that stuff, you need to stay competitive, right?
Exactly. And it's not just about keeping up. The sources also bring up some worries about the U.S. dollar.
Right. It's been the global reserve currency for, well, forever, it seems like.
Yeah, for a long time. But the research mentioned that countries like Russia and China are trying to move away from it. What's the deal with that?
Well, what are they doing? How do you even start to shift away from the dollar like that?
It's actually pretty interesting. They're setting up these alternative systems for international transactions. Like they've got these currency swap agreements with other countries.
And they don't need to use the dollar.
Right. And they're really pushing their own currencies and trade deals. Plus, some of them are looking into these digital currencies, ones backed by their central banks.
It's like they're building a whole new financial world.
It kind of is. They want to be less reliant on the U.S. That's the main goal.
Yeah, I get it. And then you throw in the whole cryptocurrency explosion on top of that, and it feels like the ground is shifting under our feet, financially speaking.
Absolutely. But hold on, think about this. When a country's financial power weakens, what happens to its influence globally?
That's a good point. I mean, if the dollar isn't the king anymore.
Exactly. The U.S. could lose a lot of leverage. Think about it. Countries might not need to hold on to huge amounts of U.S. dollars anymore. That's going to have ripple effects, on the economy, on politics.
Wow, yeah. It really does feel like this slow motion power shift is happening right in front of us. And speaking of big shifts, the research also talks about this intense technological race that's going on.
Oh, yeah. Especially with countries like China, they're making huge moves.
And it's interesting, right? Because the U.S. has always been the leader in innovation. That's kind of our thing.
Historically, yeah. But the research is showing how China's catching up, especially in stuff like renewable energy and AI. They're pouring tons of money into research and development.
They're playing the long game, for sure. Trying to be top dog in these new industries that are like the future.
Absolutely. They know what they're doing. And remember that whole thing about semiconductors?
Oh, yeah, that was a little unnerving. Can you remind me why those are so important again?
Basically, semiconductors are like the brains of all our electronics.
Right.
Phones,
No.
computers, even, military tech.
Oh, right, right. And the problem is,
The U.S. relies way too much on other countries to make those. Like a lot of our semiconductors come from Asia.
so if something happens over there, or if there are political tensions.
We're in trouble. We saw that during the pandemic, remember? Supply chains went haywire.
Yeah, that was a mess.
Yeah,
So we're vulnerable.
big time. If we lose access to those chips, it's not good. The research makes it clear. For national security and economic reasons, we have to figure out a way to get those semiconductors more reliably. Whether we make them ourselves or find other sources, it's a big deal.
Definitely a weak spot. And it's not just pressure from outside, right?
Mhm.
The research also pointed to, well, all the division within the U.S. itself.
Oh, yeah. Internally, things aren't looking so good. The research paints a pretty bleak picture of the political climate, lots of polarization, lack of trust in institutions.
It does feel like everyone's at each other's throats these days.
It's making it nearly impossible to come together and create a unified strategy for dealing with all these global problems. You can't exactly project strength on the world stage when you're fighting amongst yourselves.
Yeah, it's like we're trying to run a marathon with
Yeah.
like a broken leg or something. You can't perform at your best when you're internally messed up. And while the U.S. is dealing with all that, the rest of the world isn't exactly standing still.
Nope, they're moving right along. The research talks a lot about China, India, the European Union. They're all becoming major players and shaping what's going on globally.
They're forming alliances, pushing their own agendas.
Absolutely. And sometimes there's straight up challenging the U.S., on things like trade, climate change, development.
Okay, so we've got this financial instability, the technology race heating up, political chaos at home, and all these other countries stepping up. So how does all this impact the U.S. economy specifically?
Well, the research suggests that even though the U.S. economy is still the biggest right now, it's facing some serious headwinds. China's on track to overtake us in size within the next decade. Plus, we have our own internal issues like this crazy wealth gap.
The richest 1% having more than everyone else combined? That's insane.
It is, and if that keeps getting worse, it's going to stifle innovation and make it even harder for people to move up.
And then you add in things like deglobalization,
Yeah.
countries wanting to be more independent and less reliant on each other.
Yeah, and that can mess with supply chains and make things more expensive for everyone.
And don't forget climate change. That's a whole other layer of economic uncertainty.
Oh, yeah. Climate change is a threat to everything, really. Infrastructure, food supplies, stability in general. The U.S. has to deal with all this and still try to stay economically strong. It's a lot.
So considering everything, is there some kind of timeline for when the U.S. might actually lose its top dog status? Like, when are we talking?
Well, the research offers a few different viewpoints on that. Some experts think by 2050, the U.S. won't be the superpower anymore, just one of several big players on the world stage.
So more of a multipolar world.
Yeah, exactly. But others think the decline has already started and it's just going to keep speeding up.
That's kind of a scary thought. But it doesn't have to be game over, right? The U.S. has bounced back from tough situations before.
Right, we're adaptable. And the research does say there are things we can do to change course, or at least slow down the decline.
Like what? What needs to happen?
Well, we have to invest in our future infrastructure, education, new technologies. That's how we stay competitive. But we also have to address this political division and start rebuilding trust in our institutions.
So basically, we got to get our own act together at home and figure out a way to work with other countries on all these global issues.
Exactly. Climate change, pandemics, economic instability, these are things no country can handle alone.
This has been really eye-opening. So just to sum things up, the U.S. is facing some serious challenges. Financial strain, tech competition, internal conflicts, and a whole new global power dynamic. All of that could lead to the U.S. losing its superpower status. But it's not a done deal.
Yeah.
There are things we can do to adapt and keep playing a major role on the world stage. The question is, will we step up to the plate?
That's what it all boils down to, isn't it? The future is what we make it. It's not set in stone. The choices we make today will determine what tomorrow looks like. It's so true. And that brings me to the question I want to leave you all with. What future do you see for the U.S.? And what actions do you think would be most impactful in shaping that future? Remember, this deep dive is just the start. Keep researching, keep those critical thinking skills sharp, and keep those questions coming. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.